Tesla taking the biggest hit, down 6%. That's not the only potential headache for Elon Musk.
Yeah, I mean, there are some analysts out there who say it is because of that Model Y changeover that's the real reason behind a lot of the slump.
This is bad.
The world didn't flinch when the bomb dropped. It blinked when the refund disappeared. Overnight, Canada froze over $43 million in Tesla subsidies. No warning, no appeal. Just a clean, cold financial cut that sent Tesla's entire North American strategy into freefall. The story you're about to hear isn't about electric cars. It's about how fast an empire unravels when the money runs out. Tesla's entire Canadian logistics network seized up like a locked transmission. At least 8,753 vehicles were either in transit, docked at regional logistics hubs, or parked at dealerships expecting rebate-qualified buyers. With the incentive program frozen, those buyers evaporated. The compliance Model 3. Because when the rebates stopped, the supply chain collapsed, Elon was left stranded, and the world quietly moved on. What if America didn't lose its power in war but in accounting? What if Tesla didn't get banned by enemies but cut off by allies? And what if this is how the empire actually ends? What's happening? Stripped of its rebate edge, was no longer competitive against rivals offering better range and performance. Tesla's supply chain wasn't built for this kind of abrupt demand vacuum. Every link, from inventory rotation to software activation, was calibrated to a system of predictable rebate flows. When that system shattered, the entire chain began to convulse. Across U.S. production facilities, alarms went off. The Fremont line that had been building Canadian market Teslas shifted into idle mode by the second day. The Nevada Gigafactory's battery module shipments slowed to a crawl. Workers were reassigned or sent home. Tesla's just-in-time supply model, designed for optimal speed, had no contingency for political sabotage. Worse still, internal data teams revealed a disturbing pattern. Tesla's rebate application volumes had spiked disproportionately just before the program was frozen. 5,800 rebate claims filed in 72 hours from just 4 dealerships. It looked less like coincidence and more like a last-minute siphon of funds. That discovery didn't just fuel Canadian suspicions, it ignited international media scrutiny. This isn't just news, it's a warning shot. Stay locked in. Subscribe now. Analysts on Bloomberg and CNBC began referring to Tesla's compliance model as subsidy laundering. The term stuck, and yet as the headlines multiplied, one figure remained strangely silent. Elon Musk, the man who had once tweeted through every crisis, had gone quiet, and when he finally did speak, no one answered. Elon alone. Elon Musk had built Tesla by challenging rules, not following them. But this time, he found himself in a fight where no one was stepping up to defend him. The White House didn't issue a statement. Trade officials gave no comment. And Donald Trump, the man who once called Musk a national treasure, was nowhere to be found. Musk's internal team confirmed what he already suspected. Tesla was politically alone. No lobbying pressure from Washington. No diplomatic protest from the U.S. State Department. And no quiet back-channel reassurances. Tesla was not just frozen out of Canadian subsidies, it was frozen out of the political support system it had once counted on. Even private calls to Trump's inner circle went unanswered. Sources close to Musk confirmed 3 personal messages had been sent to Mar-a-Lago, and 1 encrypted signal to the president's policy aide. None were returned. The silence wasn't passive, it was calculated. For the first time, Musk realized that Tesla was now more liability than legacy. And to Washington insiders watching trade war tensions rise, defending a billionaire, especially one with a controversial track record, was a losing proposition. Musk didn't tweet. He didn't post. He paced. In his Palo Alto office, the only sound was the low hum of a red line chart ticking downward. Across the continent, a different kind of silence was breaking. And in Ottawa, that silence exploded into action as Mark Carney stepped into the ring. Ottawa's Cold War. Within 72 hours of the Tesla rebate freeze, Canada's new Prime Minister unveiled the boldest realignment of economic policy in decades. His goal was not just retaliation, it was decoupling, a deliberate effort to reduce Canada's exposure to U.S. economic unpredictability. First, Carney halted multiple high-value military procurement deals with U.S. defense contractors. A $19 billion F-35 fighter jet agreement was placed under national strategic review. 6 billion Canadian dollars allocated for a joint radar system with Lockheed Martin was frozen, and discussions for submarine upgrades with U.S. shipbuilders were postponed indefinitely. But Carney didn't stop at defense. He introduced the Green Integrity Act, a sweeping legislative framework designed to regulate how companies accessed Canadian subsidies. For Tesla, it meant that every rebate dollar would now require triple-layered transparency, supply chain disclosure, ethical sourcing, and environmental performance thresholds. Publicly, Carney framed the act as a moral realignment. Privately, it was economic retaliation wrapped in ethics. The act didn't name Tesla, but everyone knew who it was written for. International observers took note. French ministers praised the shift. The European Commission cited Canada as a model for ethical subsidy frameworks. And quietly, countries like Germany and the Netherlands began discussing similar reforms. Tesla's appeal to the Canadian Treasury Board was dismissed with procedural language. Eligibility no longer aligned with national objectives. No room for negotiation. No path for reinstatement. By the end of the week, Tesla was effectively blacklisted from federal incentive programs. But the deeper threat wasn't just to Tesla. It was to the entire U.S. economic posture in North America. Canada was building new walls. Not with bricks, but with values. And if this Cold War was just beginning, it would not be fought with tanks. It would be fought with tariffs, ethics, and silence. Ethics versus Elon. Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, swiftly responded to the Tesla rebate scandal, declaring the system broken. Tesla, he claimed, exploited it, and now they'd be the example. A new policy would change public funding rules for every electric vehicle company. The legislation was called the Green Integrity Act. It required all companies receiving environmental incentives to pass a new 3-layer test. First, their products had to meet strict emissions benchmarks. Second, their supply chains had to be fully disclosed and verified. Third, and most controversially, companies had to prove ethical alignment with the program's goals, which included labor practices, AI governance, and financial transparency. It wasn't a law about efficiency. It was a law about values. For Elon Musk, this wasn't just a policy shift. It was a personal indictment. Government spokespeople openly accused Tesla of subsidy laundering, a term previously used only in closed-door economic meetings. The Canadian press ran front-page headlines suggesting Tesla had manipulated an entire national program to suit its bottom line. Musk, known for dominating the news cycle with product launches and bombastic tweets, now found himself at the center of a story he didn't control. And perhaps worse, a villain in a narrative written by bureaucrats. Behind closed doors, Canada's legislative committees debated whether this act would scare off innovators or attract a new class of ethical startups. In the end, Carney made his choice clear. He wasn't interested in propping up tech titans who bent the rules. He wanted a clean tech ecosystem that answered to the public, not the other way around. And as Canada's Parliament passed the act, the global business world watched in silence. Because for the first time, a government wasn't just punishing a company. It was redefining the terms of success. The real shock, though, was still to come from across the Atlantic, where Tesla's once celebrated European expansion was about to collapse under its own weight. Tesla's European dream collapses in Germany. Tesla's Gigafactory Berlin was supposed to be a triumph, a gleaming symbol of American innovation thriving within the heart of Europe. It was built to symbolize Tesla's transformation from Silicon Valley upstart to global manufacturing powerhouse. But by the spring of 2025, that dream was evaporating faster than Musk's promises on a shareholder call. The trouble began with a photograph, a seemingly innocuous image from 3 years prior. It showed Elon Musk in Brandenburg, shaking hands with a regional official known to have far-right affiliations. The image had been ignored at the time, but it resurfaced during the Canada backlash and became ammunition for European unions and politicians who had grown wary of Musk's unpredictability. Union leaders in Germany, already frustrated with Tesla's resistance to organized labor, seized the moment. They launched coordinated protests, accusing Tesla of bypassing European labor norms and treating workers like gig economy contractors. Meanwhile, environmental activists reignited criticism over deforestation and water usage, tied to the Berlin site's construction. The dream of clean tech quickly turned murky. Tesla's German operations also began to underperform. Delays in production, missed efficiency targets, and a scandal over battery recycling compliance turned what was once a PR win into a PR nightmare. The German press, which had once celebrated Musk as a visionary, now painted him as a reckless outsider exploiting European generosity. By April, Tesla's European expansion was on life support. The company's attempts to pivot toward France and the Netherlands met resistance. Leaked memos showed that government officials in both countries were reconsidering incentive partnerships, citing uncertainty and reputational risk. What began in Canada was now spreading. The narrative of Tesla as a clean energy savior was unraveling, replaced by a far less flattering image, a company that used rules as tools and ethics as optional. As Tesla scrambled to contain the European fallout, another revelation back in Canada would send shockwaves through the heart of its business model: the ghost model. The so-called compliance version of Tesla's Model 3 had long been an open secret within the company. It was a vehicle built not to sell, but to qualify, priced at exactly 44,999 Canadian dollars, just $1 below the government threshold for rebate eligibility. It offered stripped-down features, a lower battery range, and practically zero consumer interest. It existed to tick boxes, nothing more. Internal audits released by Canada's Ministry of Transport, following a freeze of 43.1 million Canadian dollars in rebate funds, revealed that this ghost model had accounted for the vast majority of Tesla's rebate access, while fewer than 5% of actual customers ever took delivery of the compliance version. Its presence in Tesla's catalog allowed the company to unlock rebates for higher spec models. It was a loophole, legal technically, but ethically debatable at best. The media exploded. Headlines like Tesla's Trojan Horse EV and Subsidy Shell Game dominated the news cycle. Economists likened the strategy to corporate tax avoidance schemes that exploit legal gray areas. And while no laws were broken, the outrage was loud, persistent, and bipartisan. Tesla responded with a carefully worded statement, insisting that all its models were compliant with existing rebate rules. But the damage was done. The image of the ghost model became symbolic of a company that prized cleverness over cooperation. Canadian regulators, facing public pressure, announced retroactive reviews of every rebate claim tied to the compliance model since 2019. The cost to Tesla wasn't just financial, it was cultural. A brand once defined by visionary leadership was now synonymous with system gaming. And as auditors dug deeper, the numbers they found made even the skeptics pause. Because what had started as a rebate strategy was beginning to look like a billion-dollar drain on Canadian taxpayers. The billion-dollar drain. Tesla had been the poster child of clean transportation for years, but a detailed forensic audit conducted by Canada's Office of the Parliamentary Budget Officer painted a different picture. Since the implementation of the Zero-Emission Vehicles Rebate Program in 2019, Tesla had received over 713 million Canadian dollars in subsidies, a figure that shocked even seasoned analysts. This number didn't just reflect the 43 million recently frozen. It included years of quietly approved rebates tied to vehicles sold under the rebate qualifying threshold, but often swapped for higher-priced versions post-purchase. The system had allowed Tesla to effectively turn public subsidies into a revenue stream, and no one had noticed until it was too late. Public backlash grew fiercer. Economists called it a silent drain. Political commentators dubbed it the EV heist. And Tesla, once known for disrupting oil giants, was now accused of bleeding dry the very governments that had helped it rise. The revelation also triggered broader questions. How many other companies had played similar games? How broken were the subsidy mechanisms designed to accelerate green adoption? And why had no one in Ottawa flagged these anomalies earlier? Prime Minister Carney, now riding a wave of populist momentum, doubled down on the Green Integrity Act, saying, "The era of blank checks for billionaires is over." In response, Tesla began bracing for legal battles. Analysts speculated that similar investigations might soon emerge in the United States and Europe, especially as governments rethink how to balance innovation with accountability. The final figure, $713 million Canadian dollars, wasn't just a monetary loss. It was a psychological turning point. It changed the narrative around Tesla from pioneer to opportunist. And as public trust eroded, so did Musk's leverage. What began as a regulatory freeze in Canada had now become a multinational reckoning. But the most critical blow was still on the horizon, because while governments reviewed rebate logs, Tesla's competition was moving fast. And for the first time, Elon Musk wasn't just losing trust, he was losing the future, the political shift that backfired. The second Donald Trump took office again, a global tremor followed. Allies tensed. Markets hesitated. CEOs across the world knew they were re-entering a volatile chapter, one where a single tweet could undo months of strategy. But no one felt the shock more acutely than Elon Musk. In the previous administration, there was at least ambiguity. With Trump, everything was personal, especially now. The early signals were almost theatrical. Within his first 72 hours, Trump reinstated a 25% tariff on cars imported from Canada and Mexico. The official language called it a defensive economic posture. Unofficially, it was payback. Allies were no longer exempt, and that meant Canada, the very country that had just pulled Tesla's subsidies, was first on the list. It was the kind of move Trump believed would rally his base. Instead, it rallied foreign governments against him. Elon had anticipated a bumpy ride, but nothing like this. Tesla's international teams reported rising pushback from foreign regulators. Diplomats from France, Germany, and even Brazil released coordinated statements denouncing the administration's aggression. But the silence from Washington was what hurt most. Elon waited for some public defense. A tweet, a press release, anything. Nothing came. Instead, Trump posted a midnight thread that seemed ripped from a campaign rally. They said, "We couldn't do it. We are taking our industry back. No more free rides." America first. It was red meat for his supporters, but acid for trade partners. Tesla's stock dropped 5% the next morning. International orders froze. Elon wasn't just excluded from trade talks, he was scapegoated. Pundits on mainstream media painted Tesla as a foreign actor despite its massive US presence. The backlash was no longer theoretical. It was real, and it had a target. And that target was Musk. The realignment came fast and brutal. Overnight, Tesla's reputation as a global innovator turned into something darker. A billionaire-backed disruptor that failed to play by the rules. An opportunist with no home base, Musk watched as the same political machine that once celebrated his rise began casting him as the villain. And that was just the beginning. As the foundation of support crumbled beneath Elon Musk, Trump wasn't done yet. What started with autos was about to spiral into something far wider and far more destructive. The trade war expands. The 25% tariff on vehicles was only the first domino. Just days after the auto policy went into effect, the Trump administration released a new slate of trade restrictions. Pharmaceuticals, consumer electronics, raw materials. The goal? Total economic reorientation. The result? Global chaos. By the end of the second week, Wall Street was in freefall. The Dow Jones plunged by over 1,400 points. Pharmaceutical giants like Pfizer and Merck shed billions in value. Electronics manufacturers scrambled to reroute supply chains away from Asia. And in the middle of it all was Tesla, struggling to operate a global business in a country closing its doors. The pharmaceutical hit was especially damaging. According to the Food and Drug Administration, nearly 72% of pharmaceutical ingredients used in American medications are imported. Trump's new policy added a blanket 25% surcharge to all active ingredients produced abroad. This meant insulin, cancer medication, heart disease drugs, all became instantly more expensive. For Tesla, the impact came from two directions. First, consumer confidence tanked. With healthcare costs surging, American families began pulling back on discretionary purchases, including electric vehicles. Second, Tesla's own operations relied on imported materials for battery production, and those materials were suddenly caught in the tariff net. Musk's internal team estimated a direct cost increase of 12% across all North American operations. That translated to over $2 billion in projected annual losses. No rebates in Canada, no clear policy from Washington. and now a web of global tariffs that punished innovation rather than rewarded it. Other nations were not passive observers. The European Union announced retaliatory tariffs within 24 hours. Brazil slapped new restrictions on American tech companies. Even Australia began re-evaluating its defense procurement, warning that instability in U.S. economic policy could bleed into strategic alliances. At home, the damage worsened. Major retailers warned of electronic shortages heading into the holiday season. Hospitals faced rising costs, and Wall Street analysts began using a word that had been taboo since the 1980s, stagflation. In the middle of it all, Elon Musk tweeted only once. Is this leadership or sabotage? It was a rhetorical question, and one he knew the market had already answered. As Tesla reeled from the economic damage, something else was stirring back home, Detroit. And it wasn't here to help. It was here to take back what it believed was always rightfully its. Detroit sharpens the knives. While Tesla stumbled under political pressure, Ford and General Motors saw an opening, and they didn't hesitate. For years, they had been overshadowed by Elon Musk's media dominance and technological hype. But now the script flipped. Within a week of Tesla's Canadian rebate freeze, Ford launched a new advertising campaign across Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. The slogan was simple: built here, bought here, belongs here. Each commercial highlighted American union labor, domestic parts, and hometown manufacturing. It was a direct contrast to Tesla's globalized supply chain and non-unionized workforce. General Motors followed suit. Their CEO appeared on CNBC wearing a hard hat at a reopened factory in Flint, Michigan, praising union partners and pledging that every GM electric vehicle will be American-made by American hands. It was no longer about innovation. It was about nationalism. Suddenly, Tesla wasn't just a competitor. It was the outsider. Union leaders amplified the message. Flyers appeared in worker break rooms warning that Tesla threatens union standards. Political campaigns picked it up too. In key Senate races, candidates blasted Musk for exploiting tax loopholes and avoiding worker protections. Trump, despite past praise for Elon, did not intervene. In fact, he leaned into the narrative. At a rally in Ohio, he praised Detroit automakers for bringing real jobs back to real Americans, and pointedly omitted Tesla from the list. Internal polling showed the strategy was working. Approval ratings for Ford and GM surged in blue-collar regions. Tesla's favorability, meanwhile, took a nosedive. Elon Musk found himself caught between two fires. One from foreign governments retaliating against American economic policy. The other from legacy domestic players painting him as the poster child for corporate greed. For a company that once branded itself as the future of mobility, Tesla was now losing ground in the only place that mattered, the present. And as Detroit won back hearts and headlines, something deeper began shifting. Voters. Their sentiment didn't just change, it hardened, and it would soon be reflected in places that could really hurt. Voters in states reject Tesla. It started as a whisper, a couple of focus groups in Pennsylvania, a survey in Wisconsin, a town hall in Michigan. The kind of voter-level research most executives ignore until it becomes impossible to dismiss. Tesla was losing public trust. Not everywhere, but in the places that mattered. Swing states, manufacturing towns, and union-heavy districts. Places where the path to the presidency runs through, and where economic anxiety turns into political conviction. By mid-quarter, Tesla's internal polling team confirmed what campaign managers were already seeing. Negative sentiment had jumped by over 30% in the last 60 days. Independent voters who once admired Musk's ambition now saw him as detached, out of touch, unaccountable. It wasn't just the loss of Canadian rebates. It was the headlines, the rallies, the silence from the White House, the aggressive turn by Detroit. All of it converged into a single narrative. Tesla was no longer on the side of the American worker. In response, some states began taking quiet action. Lawmakers in Ohio and Missouri proposed bills to reevaluate electric vehicle subsidies, specifically targeting automakers that refused unionization. Local school boards began pulling Tesla from recommended partner lists in vocational programs. Even state-level procurement started to shift. A city fleet order in Milwaukee once earmarked for Tesla Model Ys, was redirected to Ford's Mach-Es. Officially, the reason cited was cost review. Unofficially, the optics had changed. And through it all, Elon Musk kept building. But the silence was louder than any protest. A cultural momentum had turned. Not with fury, not with riots, but with quiet reassignment of loyalty. A change in how people talked about Tesla at dinner tables, in classrooms, and at union halls. A slow-moving storm had started, and Tesla was at the center. But for the first time, it wasn't seen as the lightning. It was the exposed tower. Next, that storm would go international. Not because of Musk's ambition, but because of what America had come to represent to the rest of the world. China makes its move. New deals with Canada and Mexico. In the immediate aftermath of Tesla's removal from Canada's EV incentive program and the broader American trade fallout, Beijing quietly stepped into the vacuum. The Chinese government, working through its massive state-owned industrial network, began approaching Canadian and Mexican officials with a very different pitch. Where Washington had offered ultimatums, Beijing promised long-term partnerships, green energy investment, and no lectures on sovereignty. The offer was as simple as it was brutal. Let us replace the United States. China's diplomatic corps wasted no time. Within weeks, Beijing had secured preliminary lithium sourcing deals with 3 Canadian mining firms, negotiated rights to 2 dormant nickel sites in northern Quebec, and reached a memorandum of understanding with Mexican officials to build a joint EV battery production corridor along the U.S.-Mexico border. That last detail was key. The facilities would operate just outside of U.S. jurisdiction, but close enough to serve the entire North American market. Unlike the U.S. approach, which emphasized control and compliance, China's pitch came with fewer strings and immediate liquidity. Chinese development banks offered upfront capital. Raw materials were paid for in full, not promised through delayed procurement. And in exchange, Beijing gained a foothold in what used to be Washington's backyard. By the time D.C. realized what was happening, it was already too late. Canada had invited 2 major Chinese EV brands to participate in its updated subsidy evaluation program, and Mexico greenlit tax exemptions for lithium processing facilities backed by BYD and CATL. Even Tesla's former suppliers were quietly shifting allegiances. One executive summed it up bluntly: the U.S. plays chess. China bought the board. It wasn't just economic, it was strategic. And the signal was unmistakable. The age of uncontested American dominance in North American manufacturing had ended. But even as China cemented its place, a second blow came from across the Atlantic. This time from allies who were no longer willing to wait. Europe walks away. When Europe turns, it doesn't shout. It drifts. And over the past 6 months, Europe has been drifting away from the U.S., not in protest, but in quiet economic calculation. The European Union, once the United States' most dependable economic partner, has now started reshaping its automotive and trade alignments without waiting for Washington to catch up. It began with regulations. Germany, France, and the United Kingdom introduced new environmental and ethical sourcing standards for EVs and battery components. On paper, these rules weren't hostile to American firms. But in practice, they eliminated the eligibility of most U.S.-manufactured parts. Without verified green sourcing, transparent labor practices, and localized production guarantees, American automakers found themselves squeezed out of EU procurement rosters. This wasn't ideological. It was a shift driven by necessity. European automakers had already begun partnering with South Korean and Japanese battery manufacturers, while simultaneously exploring joint ventures in Scandinavia for raw materials. As U.S. policy became erratic and subsidies unpredictable, Europe chose to insulate itself. Ford, once a dominant presence in Germany and Spain, saw its market share drop below 3%. General Motors, after re-entering the UK market with high hopes, suddenly faced surprise tariffs. Tesla's Gigafactory Berlin was left in a political limbo, still operating, but with future expansion plans now stalled. A senior French official explained the new logic with brutal clarity. We cannot rely on a partner whose economic strategy changes with every tweet. Meanwhile, the EU fast-tracked a new trade corridor linking French and Italian ports to Moroccan battery assembly plants, a route that deliberately bypassed American suppliers. Britain, no longer formally part of the EU, nevertheless mirrored this move, deepening defense and energy ties with Canada and South Korea instead of the US. What had started as whispers in Brussels and Berlin became policy. And in boardrooms across Europe, one question dominated: how long can a relationship survive when reliability dies? As Europe built distance, another fracture emerged. This time not between countries, but within America's own intellectual elite. America's talent exodus. It started with a few job postings. In late spring, 2 prominent Tesla software engineers announced their resignations and, within days, were hired by a rising German EV startup headquartered in Stuttgart. Then a hardware designer from Apple's secretive automotive division left for a research lab in Toronto. Within 3 weeks, the trend had a name: the American talent exodus. The shift isn't just about better salaries. It's about stability, opportunity, and long-term vision. As U.S. trade policy destabilized entire sectors, and Washington doubled down on volatile subsidy programs, engineers and developers began looking for calmer waters. For the first time in decades, American innovation was no longer synonymous with American companies. South Korea, Canada, and Germany are now emerging as the new meccas of clean tech talent. Toronto-based Helion Mobility, founded by ex-Tesla engineers, has already recruited nearly 100 staff from Silicon Valley. Seoul's newest energy lab boasts hires from both Rivian and Lucid Motors. And in Germany, state-backed incentives for American professionals include not just relocation costs, but equity stakes and long-term R&D funding. For Elon Musk, the loss has been personal. Multiple design teams from Tesla's Fremont campus have resigned en masse, many citing political instability, not compensation, as their reason for leaving. One internal survey, leaked anonymously, revealed a staggering 43% of Tesla's engineering staff considered leaving within the next 6 months if current conditions held. It is not just about employment, it is about identity. For decades, the U.S. was seen as the undisputed center of innovation, a gravitational force drawing the best minds from across the globe. But now the gravity has reversed. The concern isn't that the United States lacks talent. The concern is that the talent no longer trusts the system that once celebrated disruption. Without stability, even the most brilliant minds walk. And as the brain drain accelerates, it all points to one final question, one that no one in Washington seems ready to answer. End of the empire. The warning signs weren't subtle. One by one, America's auto giants began faltering on the international stage. Tesla was banned from Canadian subsidies. Ford was squeezed out of Europe. General Motors watched its supply contracts crumble as China undercut their pricing in Mexico. Then came the silence. Not from the markets, not from the media, but from the leadership. As the world scrambled to realign trade, production, and innovation, the United States doubled down on rhetoric. Donald Trump threatened new tariffs. Elon Musk issued cryptic warnings on social media. And in the vacuum of vision, allies simply left. Canada rewrote its incentive programs. The EU implemented border adjustment taxes. Latin American nations signed bilateral agreements with Beijing. Even Japan and South Korea, longtime U.S. allies, realigned their supply chains to bypass American oversight. The shift wasn't just geographic, it was philosophical. The world no longer saw America as the future. It saw America as unpredictable. And in global commerce, unpredictability is death. The empire had not fallen in fire. It had withered in silence. There will be many postmortems. Some will blame politics. Others will point to supply chain mismanagement. Some will say Tesla grew too fast. Others will argue Washington moved too slow. But the truth is simpler. America's dominance depended on more than factories. It relied on the trust of partners, the loyalty of talent, and the stability of vision. All three are now gone. And as the global stage resets without Washington at the helm, one final question echoes across the silent factories and hollowed-out boardrooms of Detroit and Silicon Valley. Did America lose the global auto war, or did it simply stop showing up? Let us know your thoughts in the comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.